The question on everyone's mind now is, was the BBI report doctored?
Well, that's your question. Thank you very much for bringing me on. During his address to parliamentarians in Naivasha, the president expressed amazement at the very short memory of Kenyans. The handshake stemmed from a realization that in the last 30 years or so, we have had violence in every election period, before, during, or after, except in the elections of 2002. One can talk about Onespukia, one can talk about Likoni, you can talk about Kiambaa Church, you can talk about Baby Pendo, you can talk about Naivasha when we had incidents in 2007, 2008. The list goes on. They had premised on that realization that we should not continue like this, because apart from that, there's a lot of disruption during elections. It affects our economy. It affects the growth of this country. So the handshake was a ceasefire. The BBI stems from the handshake, the way the handshake stems from realization that we don't need any more of this violence. These are big issues. It's not about signatures.
Big issues indeed, Mr. Tuju, but the whole point of this handshake was to bring peace and unity in the country, to make sure all Kenyans were included in the national deliberations on this. What this claim here comes to confirm to Kenyans is that this was a project of a few. Many Kenyans who still want their views included in this report are being locked out because it was a project of a few.
I can explain to you that very well, and please do listen to me very carefully. What we want is to ensure that every election cycle, we don't have this kind of violence. We don't want to have any more of these baby pendos. And when we have violence in an election, any of us can fall victim. Any of us can become a baby pendo. What we need is a structure, a construct that ensures that after every election, Kenyans can live in peace. This matter was open to Kenyans for the last 2 years to bring in the ideas. I think I have several ideas, and I think several other people have ideas. But the most important is that what is in this document, which will ensure that we don't have violence during, after, or before elections. It is not what I think or what anybody else thinks. It is what are the provisions there. And the provisions there do not necessarily have to agree with what I think. What is important is that there are provisions which make sense, and Kenyans were given a chance to contribute.
Major John Sei, a member of the 14-member task force that was collecting views from Kenyans, says some of the sweeping proposals were strange to them because they never featured in their deliberations. So that's why I'm asking you today, are these really the views of Kenyans? Among these issues that he says is, the introduction of 70 more constituencies, because at the time, the conversation among Kenyans was punguza mzigo. Let's reduce the ballooning wage bill in the country. So was this really among the deliberations Kenyans intended to be in this report?
Let me just explain to you something that may be able to make you appreciate what we have. This is not about scoring debating points. I was in government in 2007 when we had the post-election violence. The ceasefire made this country have a total of 43 ministers, and we had 86 assistant ministers. The government was made up of more than 120 people. That was extremely expensive for this country. But if it is what brought peace, it was worth it. So on one side, we can't be blowing hot and cold, and Kenyans have to accept that there's a cost of having peace and having representation. Tell me which parliamentary constituency is ready to say that, for example, we think we are too small a constituency, combine us with the next constituency so that we can save the government money. Which county in this country is ready to accept that they are so small as a unit, they should be dissolved and put together with the neighboring constituency that will save money? We can get into the business of scoring points, but the most important thing is to ensure that we have provisions that will enable us to live in peace.
Let me bring in the fact that, you know, already at this point with the BBI report, proponents of the report have decided to pass the proposals as is, or popularize them as is, despite calls for consensus building, calls for a possible uncontested referendum in the country. So already that has divided the country. These issues of possible sneaking of issues in the final BBI report cast further doubt on this process. How do we begin to redeem the trust of Kenyans in the BBI report now?
It doesn't matter how long we talk about this, there are going to be people who will have alternative opinions. That's why you have a referendum, that's why you have a vote. There are certain provisions in the BBI which personally I have my doubts about. I may feel some anxiety, or I may have some reservations. But at the end of the day, you can't have everything. It's a compromise document. In the United States, they have had 37 amendments to their constitution, or thereabout, certainly more than 30. Maybe 37 is not exact, but certainly more than 30. This is going to be our first amendment to our constitution, the 2010. We can have a second amendment, we can have a third amendment, a 10th amendment. We can never have something perfect. But we need this BBI to go through if it can assure us that in 2022, there'll be no more baby pendos. There'll be no more Kiamba Church.
What Kenyans want is a transparent process, and through this conversation, sir, I don't feel that you have answered the question of the allegations brought about by Major Said there. And among his conversation there, he says that they were in total disbelief. All 14 members of the task force, and they were asked to sign the final report that was to be handed over to the president and the ODM leader without going through the content. And he said they were pressured in a high-level meeting that was attended by, among other people, ODM leader Raphael Tuju, as well as PS Karanja Kibisho. So again, the question is, what was the rush if the process, the aim of this process was unification of the country?
Oh, there's a definite rush, that I can tell you. And if you look at the timeline for us to pass this thing, it has to happen before August, because after August will be exactly 1 year to an election. And there are those distractors to this particular process who would want us to have every excuse. They would want to have every excuse to ensure that we don't pass this thing by August next year. Then it means it's too late. You know, some of the excuses we are getting, like this thing you're talking about, an enlarged executive, a big wage bill, and the rest of it. Nobody, and this is the elephant in the House, and I'd like to repeat this so that Kenyans can hear. This BBI report is also making provisions for two things. A definite pathway for the two-thirds provision which is in our constituency, which is in our constitution, to be included in the constitution so that this matter can be put to rest once and for all. If you remember, Chief Justice Maraga recently made a provision that we should go for another election. So this BBI report gives us a pathway to resolve that problem politically through a referendum, and Kenyans will be able to solve the problem that has been created by that provision in our constitution, 2010 constitution.
I hear you, sir.
But let me tell you the elephant in the house. But listen at least to the elephant in the house, which all these people who are talking against this BBI do not want you to know. But I want you to go and read the BBI report. For the first time in our constitution, we're going to make a provision very much like we've made the provision in the Electoral Act, in the electoral laws, that you have to resolve the issues of corruption in 6 months, maximum 12 months if we put in the appellate processes, because now we have a situation in which economic crimes, somebody steals 2 billion, 1 billion, and then he goes on in court forever. There's no end to it. I mean, cases which are there right now, maybe they'll be resolved in the year 2030. You know, some governors are taken to court and all of a sudden you hear they have contracted corona, the case cannot proceed. I've not heard any of these people who are talking about an enlarged executive addressing this particular robust provision which is in our constitution, which will save us so much money. Much, much more than anybody can be talking about the provisions of an enlarged executive.
But the question still remains, can we solve
to challenge
corruption?
What it is I'm saying.
Can we solve corruption through a corrupted process? The allegations that have been brought about by a member of the 14-member task force cast serious issues of credibility on this process. Some, in fact, say that the claims of sneaking issues in this report could be the reason